Today on the newscast, we've got all the breaking details on the major conflict raging right now between Israel and terror groups in Gaza. The rockets continue to fall and Israel is responding. Much more coming up. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. We've got breaking news for you today, so let's get right into it. A major conflict is raging right now between Israel and the Iran-backed terror groups Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who are operating out of Gaza. Now, as I'm coming to you right now, it's around, 11:35 a.m. Eastern Time here in the United States, and so far, close to 650 rockets have been launched from Gaza into Israel in the past 24 hours alone. That's quite a clip, folks. Now, the rockets have mainly targeted the communities in southern Israel that surround the Gaza Strip, in particular at the city of Ashkelon, which is just north of Gaza along the Mediterranean coast, has been hit very hard with hundreds of rockets. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, Monday, May 10th, we had at least 7 rockets target Jerusalem. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said Jerusalem is a red line, and Israel has certainly responded forcefully with airstrikes. More on that in a minute, but let's get you up to speed right now on the situation on the ground. On my phone, over the past 24 hours, nonstop, folks, every few minutes, I am getting alerts from the Israel Defense Forces about sirens blaring across southern Israel in those communities, warning of incoming rockets. I can tell you this has been a steady clip throughout the night. Didn't get much sleep, but hey, that's why we do what we do here at the Watchman Newscast, to be watchmen on the wall, to be your eyes and ears on what's going on in the Middle East, in particular at a time like right now. So the rockets continue to come. Hamas at one point today, Tuesday, May 11th, said it launched some 130 rockets in a 5-minute span. Folks, what they are trying to do is test Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system and essentially overwhelm it with such a massive barrage of rockets that some of them are bound to get through and slip through Iron Dome. Thankfully, Iron Dome has had a very high success rate so far. Over 90% of the rockets that have been launched from Gaza into Israel have been intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. But the rockets keep coming. The success rate of Iron Dome has not seemed to discourage Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I talked about that massive barrage of Hamas rockets in a 5-minute span. I have to mention Ashkelon again, folks, because a few hours ago this morning, Ashkelon was hit by some 200 rockets in a span of 1 hour. So what we are seeing here is really massive clusters of rockets. It's not just a lone stray rocket here and there. These are coming fast and furious. And again, the goal is to overwhelm Israel's missile defense systems. What's the situation on the ground in terms of damage and casualties? This is very unpleasant to share. 2 Israeli women have been killed in these rocket strikes. Dozens more Israelis have been wounded. There have been direct hits on Israeli buildings, even cars on the street where these rockets have struck them. 2 buildings at least, very lethal and direct hits in Ashkelon. Again, Ashkelon really a main target here for these terror organizations operating out of Gaza. Now, on the flip side, in Gaza, several Palestinians killed as well, the vast majority of them Hamas operatives, as the Israel Defense Forces carry out retaliatory airstrikes against Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Remember, folks, these terror organizations in Gaza literally use women and children as human shields. Not only that, they intentionally fire these rockets from civilian areas. And how does Israel react? Well, today alone, Israel called off airstrikes against Hamas and Islamic Jihad targets in Gaza because there was a concern over potential civilian casualties. Folks, I'd go so far to say, and I say it without hesitation, that Israel and the United States are the most humane fighting forces in the history of the world. They go to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties. but it's kind of hard sometimes when your enemy willfully and gladly, with no regard for human life whatsoever, uses women, children, the elderly, civilians as human shields. So it's a no-win situation for Israel. If they don't carry out any airstrikes, the rockets will continue. If they do carry out airstrikes, there's a good chance there could be some civilian casualties, not due to Israel's intentions, but due to the cowardly actions of the likes of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, not to mention Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So that's the situation right now. We hate to see any loss of life, but Israel has to defend its own civilians first and foremost. And as these rockets continue to fall, Israel can't just stand there and do nothing and watch Israelis be killed. So the reaction has been strong. Israel has carried out probably around 150 airstrikes right now against chiefly Hamas targets in Gaza. We're talking military targets. We're talking weapons and rocket warehouses, rocket launchers. Also, at least 2 Hamas terror tunnels have been targeted in these strikes. As we know, we've shown you here in the past on the Watchman Newscast, Hamas literally has dug tunnels beneath Gaza into southern Israel, cross-border tunnels, with the intention of popping out in an Israeli community and either killing or kidnapping Israelis, taking them back through those tunnels into Gaza. It's like something out of a horror movie. So Israel took out at least 2 of these tunnels. But I think the big news in terms of these retaliatory strikes by Israel is that at least 3 commanders for Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been killed, including the leader of Islamic Jihad's rocket unit. So you would think that that is a very big blow to the capabilities of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Remember, Iran-backed organizations, folks, that is a key point here. The head of the snake for all of this sits in Tehran right now in the office of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. Iran is the head of the snake, and I'd like to see the world condemn the Iranian regime over this, because Hamas and Islamic Jihad are bought, trained, funded, supported by Iran. So not only should the world call on Hamas and Islamic Jihad to cease the rocket attacks immediately, it should call on their master in Tehran, the Iranian regime, to call off their proxies and to demand that the rocket attacks cease. But something tells me we won't see that. So we talked about it yesterday in detail here on the Watchman Newscast. We did nearly an hour-long live stream yesterday. You can check it out in our archives under Newscast. While you're there, be sure to subscribe. But we broke down what's going on in Jerusalem right now. We're going to focus on the Gaza situation today, but just to touch on Jerusalem real quick, serious unrest. Today has been quiet, thank God, after 4 straight days of serious unrest, including rioting atop the Temple Mount, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, fireworks, bottles, rocks, all weapons being stored on the Temple Mount by Palestinian rioters, clashing with Israeli police. Again, we talked about that in detail. Yesterday was Jerusalem Day, so we really focused on that on yesterday's newscast. But the world has really been condemning Israel, including the United States, has been condemning Israel over the violence in Jerusalem that took place over the past few days. Again, things are quiet in Jerusalem today. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as Psalm 122 verse 6 mandates us to do as followers of Jesus. But, you know, I look at Jerusalem as the trigger for what's happening right now in Gaza. Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, he riled this whole thing up, folks. Israel's so-called partner for peace, he pretty much put the word out. And Jerusalem literally went up in flames. Yesterday, there was literally a fire near the Al-Aqsa Mosque. One of the rioters apparently set off fireworks. A tree caught on fire, and we had literally a blaze atop the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism, of course, where the Jewish temples once stood. Very significant for me as a Christian. Jesus taught in those temples, chased out the money changers there. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock also sit atop the Temple Mount, 3rd holiest site in Islam. So very tense situation in Jerusalem, and that kind of kicked things off. Then we saw the rockets coming. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and their Iranian masters were condemning what was going on in Jerusalem. This was their response, the rocket barrages. Where does it go from here? Good question. Could this escalate even further into a major war? The last major war we saw between Israel and terror forces in Gaza occurred nearly 7 years ago in the summer of 2014. It lasted for weeks upon weeks throughout the summer. Over 50 Israelis were killed, Israeli soldiers. And that's a key point here, folks. So far, we have not seen a ground incursion by the Israel Defense Forces. We're seeing a massive campaign of airstrikes. I think for now it's going to remain as such. Israel is clearly using very good precision intelligence on the ground and pinpoint accuracy. They are targeting leaders in the Hamas and Islamic Jihad terror movements. As I mentioned a minute ago, at least 3 important senior Palestinian Islamic Jihad commanders have been killed, including the head of their special rocket unit. Here's what it all hinges on. What does Iran want? Will Hamas and Islamic Jihad call off the wolves, so to speak? Will Iran tell them, okay, that's enough, we've made our point against the Zionist entity, we've inflicted enough damage? When do they stop? Will they stop today, tomorrow? Will they look for a ceasefire? That's usually how it goes. It's up to the terror forces in Gaza as to when this stops and as to whether it escalates. But I can tell you, as I come to you, close to 650 rockets in a 24-hour span. That's a serious uptick, number one. Number two, again, no civilized society can live like that. That's the situation Israel is facing right now. We will continue to bring you updates on this developing situation. We want to be your one-stop shop for all things Middle East. What happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East, as we are learning once again this week. It profoundly affects all of us, no matter where we live, and things are only going to get deeper, folks. Until tomorrow, thanks for joining us. God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.